fun fact about me, I spent most of my career as a marketer, and it's only recently that I started hosting a podcast about data science.
My friend Sundar had the exact opposite career path. He started in data, and today is a marketer with a newsletter and podcast of his own called Experimental. Along the way, he worked on some super cool projects, including 5 years at Uber, where eventually he was the head of data science for all of their brand marketing initiatives, which meant trying to measure the effectiveness of billions of dollars of advertising spend. I wanted to sit down with Sundar to know what he learned on the journey at Uber, what fascinates him about marketing, and why the career transition. I'm Ryan Lucht, and this is today's episode of Outperform. So, Sundar, I'm super excited for this conversation because I feel like you and I kind of have mirror image career paths in a way. You started off as a data scientist and a data leader, and I think over time found your way to marketing and have kind of fallen in love with marketing, whereas I am a marketer by trade and certainly all I am truly qualified to do, who now finds himself solely talking about data science and almost never doing any marketing anymore. So I'm interested to see where our paths cross here, but maybe it'd be good just to give folks the high level or mid level of your career journey and kind of how we're coming to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, it's thank you for having me, and it's always great to chat with you. So, I mean, at a high level, I've got about a 15-year career. The first 5 of it, I was exploring truly what I wanted to do. So I started off as a software developer. So I did that for 2 years, and I loved programming, loved being technical, but did not like being a software developer. Although in hindsight, probably should have stuck to that. That would have been a lot more lucrative. And then I went into finance. So, I went to college for finance. So I thought I was more interested in that. So I wanted to try that out and had a great role at the U.S. Treasury that I could always touch on more. It was a very fun role, but I looked at my manager and said, yeah, I don't really want to do what you're doing. So I didn't want to stay in finance. And then I got a really interesting opportunity to jump over to be a marketing analyst, where a friend who was working at a company was like, hey, we're looking for someone analytical. Do you know anybody? And I sort of just put myself out there and said, I'm analytical. I'm looking to get into marketing because digital marketing was all the rave then. It's so rare to get that opportunity to be able to hop industries. I was like, I'll do it. I'll learn. I just got to learn about the business. And she's like, yep, great. So I went there, did that for 10 months. And then Uber called me, had like a fantastic interview process, loved it. Obviously, I used them. So I was like, great. This is where I think I want to have my next career step. And that's where I truly fell in love with marketing. So I spent 5 years at Uber, by far the best experience I've had, and did everything from performance to life cycle to brand. And so I was a marketing data science leader across all of those. So I truly got to see full funnel, what you can do, what that looks like. I then went on to went to a couple of startups, didn't have like the best experience, went into my own consulting, didn't have the best experience there. And had one more full-time role, which I started in January of this year. That lasted 6 months. And now I'm all in on my newsletter and podcast. And it's solely talking about like the completely beautiful world of consumer tech marketing. So not just marketing data science, but I really love everything from the brand to the creative to research. And so it just talks about the whole spectrum. But yeah, that's my career in a short 2-minute spiel.
But crucially, the newsletter and the podcast both called Experimental. So I guess what's the learning from your marketing data science days that you're trying to bring to the marketing leaders that you're focused on speaking to now?
Yeah. So I think first off, the name Experimental actually is supposed to be more a play on the word mental, as in the crazy world. So it's like it really is a crazy world, because if you think about how much we focus on product and tech, it's an important thing, but like there's equally a crazy marketing story behind every big consumer tech. All right, from Airbnb, where their founders were selling cereal boxes to raise money, to Uber that we were flyering on the street. We had Uber ice cream. To Bumble's a good example, where like just some of the hacks that Whitney Wolf came up with were marketing. And so I've called it experimental, but the tagline is smarter marketing starts here. Because I think for me, what I find lacking is a lot of marketers talk to marketers. So it's like, here's a beautiful ad, here's great creative, cool, fine. And then there's a lot of marketing data scientists talking to marketing data scientists. Like MMM, and then they go super deep on MMM, like Bayesian versus non-Bayesian, all of these different things. And I'm like, I care about the middle. I care about the intersection, because I've worked with brilliant marketers that wanted to become smarter marketers and more equipped with a modern way of doing marketing and measuring marketing. On the flip side, I work with data scientists, and their biggest knock against them is they don't know the business. And so like, how do I bridge that gap? And so I started writing my own newsletter, sharing a lot of what I learned from Uber. And then the extension of that is, well, don't just learn from me, learn from people that are doing this at the highest levels of other companies, right? And so it's for me, that's like the goal of it. And so experimentation, and part of it, why it's called experimental, is a big part of marketing. It's a huge part. And, everything from trying to go viral on TikTok to, again, like more robust measurement methodologies are all about experimentation. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of different play on words going on at once, I think.
Yeah.
At least I think I'm being clever.
I think it's totally true, right? And especially there are lots of, I don't want to say like colloquial uses of the word experimentation, but truly, in my eyes at least, like tinkering and experimenting outside of the confines of a randomized controlled trial is a pretty basic human instinct when we want to do things better or make things better. And certainly marketing requires a lot of that, and a lot of thinking in ways that maybe competitors aren't yet, because you need to penetrate a crowded, noisy marketplace. But maybe a good way to take this would just be chronological. And start kind of in the Uber days, because that's no slouch of a data science function. I imagine like anything you could possibly run into as a marketing data scientist, you ran into at Uber. So maybe we should talk just a bit about like what some of the biggest responsibilities of the function or of your work were there, and like what sorts of projects you got your hands dirty with.
Yeah. So I'll start actually at the end. So the last role I had was I was their global head of brand data science. And the fun part was I got to build out the function. And so brand data science was responsible for helping and working with the brand marketers to measure over $1 billion of brand spend. And what's exciting to me there is like, there aren't too many of us. Like there aren't too many people that have been lucky enough to like been given the luxury of working for a company that can spend that much on brand, but is also willing to then test and do all the things that you need to measure. And so that was one responsibility, and I led it globally. And so really got to see like, in the US, you have the luxury of at least 50 capital cities that are really decent in population. You can find treatment controls to do synthetic controls. And then you go to a place like Australia, which might seem big, but it's really got 3 major capital cities, right? Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. And they all are concentrated to similar geographic areas. So like you can't really do as much testing. And then you go to Europe, and you could be like, oh, you've got 40 countries. Seems great. Yeah, except every country has a different language, different characteristics of their demographic. And then on the operational level at Uber, pricing was different in every market, and the laws would change every day in a different market. And so you've got this like beautiful way of like, how do I bring in more methodologies, but really have to confront real world facts that you have to deal with when you're running geotest and other types of tests. And so that was really fun. On the and then I'll go back. The role before was leading performance marketing. And performance marketing, one of the best experiences I had there was I helped save Uber $30 million because we ran an incrementality test on Facebook. And it's a story that I've been asked to share on so many podcasts, and I won't get into too much here. But I think the highlight there was not the actual result. Like, yes, that's really cool. I got to understand what truly an incrementality test did. But that's where I like developed, I'm like, this is what data-driven culture looks like. Like from end to end, right? I saw something in the data. Like my marketing partner's like, hey, something feels off. And I was like, yeah, something feels off. I built a deck that was maybe 10 slides. I ran it by the CMO who was like, go test it out. And that to me is like why I think I've also been jaded. And I'm like, I don't know if I can work in many other places. Like when you can make decisions as a junior level analyst coming in saying, here's the data, here's some slides, let's go test it out. And it's like, yep, no question. That's where I learned about culture. And the role before that, going one step back, reverse chronologically, was at a local level. And so there, I was helping out with more lifecycle marketing at the local operations level, because at the time when I joined in 2016, you essentially had maybe 200 different companies within Uber, and that whole thing was called Uber. But like every market operated as a effectively a silo with a GM. You obviously, borrowed engineering from San Francisco because the app was the same, but all the decisions from pricing, from regulatory, from how do you want to go and like go hack it was all done at a local level. And what I loved there was like truly understanding how to be customer obsessed, because I worked on the DC market. So I would take an Uber home to and from every day. And so I got to talk to drivers every day, and we could then make that feedback loop go into decisions quickly. A good example that I'll share is I was talking to a driver. He was like, hey, this is my first day or second day. I was like, how'd it go? And he's like, Uber keeps telling me to drive on Friday nights, but man, it's so busy. It's overwhelming. It was my first trip. I was like, oh yeah. Then I looked in the data, and retention for drivers who start their first trip on Friday versus Saturday is lower. And so I was like, okay, this is fascinating. Why don't we test out pushing Saturday mid-afternoon when it's still the weekend, still calm, you'll still be busy, and look what that does to 30-day retention for drivers. And we were able to do it, and we were able to test it. And then what's cool is like we were able to then send those results out, and you could scale it, right? Because you're like, hey, DC did this. Why don't we try this in Florida? And it sort of spreads. And so I think there I learned a bit more about customer obsession. And so going back to your question of responsibilities, like it was sort of, you could do whatever you wanted in that, like if you had, everybody had access to the data. It's incredible. Like I don't think a single person at Uber that doesn't have access to our entire database. Obviously the personal stuff is removed, but like you could do as much as you wanted, and then you could present it and you could try it out. And so our responsibilities were often, make it more efficient, but also try something new. Another good example was we wanted to launch in Baltimore a cross Uber pool product. So we had a lot of people flying into Baltimore, BWI. Can we do a Uber pool joint from the airport to DC, sort of think about that. And I was responsible for modeling that out, pitching it, sort of trying to get pricing right. I was also responsible for setting the Uber pool geofence in DC. So like, should we be doing Uber pool across everywhere? And the answer is like, no. People were taking a trip from like all the way outside into DC, knowing that likely they weren't going to get someone else. And so you were just discounting Uber pool rides. So these are kind of things where anything data related, like and that was it. That was the scope. The scope was just make stuff better with data. And that, and like, that's kind of the mandate. And that was about it.
Yeah, that's wild. I have a bunch of follow-up threads that we could kind of take from here. I guess one, before we go outside of the scope of the work itself, especially the problems that you were working on later in your time at Uber, all of this marketing measurement and brand measurement. These are like still pretty frontier problems. And I want to like make sure this is represented for folks who maybe aren't hands-on on these topics today. But, this was a few years ago that you were working on these things at Uber. Yeah. Even in the last 6 to 12 months, there's been so much discourse, discussion, new research published, arguing about how we should methodologically approach these problems that you're talking about, like incrementality testing and geo tests, and trying to figure out, is this, $1 billion of brand advertising spend being well deployed? Do you feel like you had a handle on these questions internally, or did it feel kind of like this Wild West vibe of, we are trying to learn how to do the thing at the same time we are trying to do the thing? build the plane while you're flying it, to use the classic startup
Yeah.
metaphor.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think some context is helpful is like we had this massive advantage that I had some of the greatest marketing data scientists that I got to work with. World class, right? So Uber has its own open source MMM, and I'm working side by side with the people that built it. I could go to them anytime I wanted to be like, "Hey, help me through this," right? So contextually, I have this advantage over most teams. I think what people complexify in a way is that the measurement methodologies between, say, a performance marketing and brand marketing are effectively the same. What actually changes is a lot of the risk mitigation that you have to do to even set up the campaign. And what I mean by that is like working with finance and working with operations and working with these teams to say, hey, this test doesn't look like a performance marketing test. It structurally does, but we could get 3 months into a 6 months campaign and product changes something, and we've now lost that entire 3-month test that an A/B test could handle. And that's the kind of, I think, wild, wild west that I didn't really have as many resources. I don't think a lot of, at the time, 2020, 2021, a lot of teams have publicly stated what they were doing. So there's a little bit of wild, wild west on like, how do you convince a very data-driven organization, but short-term data-driven organization, who was grappling with, they just IPO'd, they had to transition to probability. We were getting our butts kicked by DoorDash and still are in the US on the Uber Eats side. How do you position brand as an effective tool using the tools that you already have with performance marketing? I think that's where the wild, wild west is. It wasn't on the measurement. I got to say, like, on the measurement side, I'm still a pretty big believer, and this might be quite sacrilegious to you. I'm pretty effective with pre-post. Like, I can arguably make and a lot of it is experience. A lot of it is just like contextually being like, hey, how do I position pre-post as like we can't get accuracy, but there's, we don't need the certainty because the complexity of the decision isn't that hard, blah, blah, blah. Like, I can frame pre-post. And so I came with that lens of like, anything I'm doing above pre-post is actually making us marginally better. But there were times where we did do pre-post. Like, you have, trying to think of a market, but like, let's take South Korea, for example. You've got Seoul, and you that's it. In terms of like city. So like, how do you measure the efficacy of brand there? And you go, well, let's just see what happens if we turn it off. And if you can't observe it on a pre-post, then it either wasn't big enough or, truly not as like complex as we thought. And again, you make an educated guess, but I'm not talking about like within a week, right? We're talking about like longer time periods. You also have the luxury of multiple years of seeing year-over-year growth. And so example is, if you see year-over-year consistently, you're growing at 50%, and all of a sudden you turn off brand and it goes to like 20%, you're like, it's a mix of experience. And so I think that's where the wild, wild west comes in again. To you just learn how to frame things with no real, like, with people that have never had to. And this is the fascinating part, is like, finance has never been asked to prove brand, and all of a sudden they are. Yeah. Brand managers who come from countries like come from companies like Coke, Coca-Cola, and Google, and all these places that just sort of believed a brand, all of a sudden are now being asked to prove it. You have a marketing data science team that has never done it before that's now being asked to prove it. And that's where the wild, wild west is the alignment. I think once we were able to get the alignment on the measurement strategy and the framework, of course, there's some bumps, but like, it's still the same process being now used today. And I'm like really good friends with the current head of brand data science there. And like, we still talk, and it's like, yeah, we're doing effectively the same thing. The measurement strategy hasn't changed in the 4 years since I've left, but there's a lot more appetite for it, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I probably could have guessed before this conversation that there was a lot of things that would spoil you about spending 5 years at Uber, given not just the level of resourcing, but also how talented that team is. But certainly in clearer picture now. And before we leave the Uber thread and talk about the broader career shift from data science to marketing, I guess On the culture front, I kind of want you to talk to me a little bit more about the people that you're framing all of this work to. Like, what did you learn from your marketing leadership coworkers at Uber, and are you trying to like take some of what you saw in them and present it as a model to the marketing leaders that you're talking to now in your content?
Yeah. So just a really quick thing on what you said. Like the biggest thing I took away from Uber was by far the people, like the talent density that I got to work with, but the culture. And when those things combine, it really is quite unstoppable. And I think that's the part that's always lacking. It's usually the culture that's lacking first. And I think we've talked about this before. So if you can fix the culture, it attracts the people that want to be at that culture, and then it becomes a great flywheel. To answer your question with like the marketing leaders, I think what I learned there was you really need to be an ally. And so one of the things we'll talk about is why I associate myself more as a marketer now. And this is where it all happened, was like, I am a marketer first that happens to be good at data science, not a data scientist that's working on marketing. And I think that's where I fell in love with this idea. I'm like, hey, we are a partnership. Like, brand is truly, to me, because I'm seeing the data that performance isn't working anymore. Brand is our biggest next moat. And candidly, product is not the differentiator, because you already have so much replication across your competitors. Like, it can't be product, because at this point, any marginal product that you add can be built and added on to the competition really quickly as well. What you can never replicate is the brand. And so when I realized brand was the biggest thing, I sort of took it on myself to try to understand better what brand meant. And what's fascinating is like everything from creative pre-testing is different. Media buying is different. All of these things that I took for granted on performance because you could just sort of launch and figure it out, you can't do with brand, and you do a lot more planning. And so that framing, and that's the stuff that I learned with the marketers, and I became like such a big believer in marketing, is now what I take. So to your question around how I talk to new marketing leaders, and it's like, hey, you don't have to like position brand as this one thing. One example is you could position brand as a performance like amplifier, enhancer. Like, for example, like if you're doing, let's say 100 signups right now at a $5 CAC, well, eventually you're going to be able to only do 100 signups like a $10 CAC. If you want to keep doing things at a $5 CAC, you need to introduce brand and blah, blah, blah. So it's learning how to position brand as a complement to performance. It's learning to position brand as not only complement to performance, but everything from like increasing lifetime value and decreasing your necessity for promotions, right? And so you start to learn to speak to these different audiences. So I would go to finance and I was like, hey, yes, we're spending $1 on brand, but here's what it likely will do to our performance budgets, and you can start to see it. And so I think learning how to structure those conversations for the audience. And again, at the end of the day, finance, operations, your C-suite, they're all just trying to understand the risk. And so learning how to like mitigate the risk, but doing it through a marketing lens and not using too much like marketing jargon, but like, you can't just go to a C-suite and be like, oh yeah, awareness is going to go up. It's like, no, that doesn't help anybody. It's like, I'm a data scientist, and I would say, okay, hey, marketing is driving this campaign towards awareness, but the proxy metric that we're going to use is search traffic, right? Because they understand search traffic has a funnel, you can convert, blah, blah, blah. And that's how I would start to frame these things and connect these dots. And I think that's where I learned how to do that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I want to go like rewind back to the thing you said at the very beginning of this answer and talk about the career shift itself, because I like the way you framed it, right? It was very subtle. It was, I see myself as a marketer who happens to be really good at data science and not a data scientist who happens to be working on marketing. I think like I have a similarly subtle story I tell people, which is marketers always wanted to ask me, what should I be testing? Like what specific hypotheses, what UI, UX patterns? And I found no joy in trying to answer that question. And instead, I really wanted to answer how and why should I be testing? And it was like that subtle of a shift manifested as, what looks on paper like a fairly large change in job description and career responsibilities. I guess what's your version of this? Like, what to you is that distinction or the like difference in fulfillment you feel as a marketer who happens to be good at data science versus a data scientist who happens to be working on marketing?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to control and ambition. And not that I'm a control freak, but what is often frustrating is coming up with either a model or an insight or whatever, and it's the right thing for the business, and it just doesn't get executed. And of course, there's a component of it of like, yeah, but you got to sell. But like, yeah, fair. But you also need an audience that's receptive, right? Sure. Like you can't sell to. And so, and I think a lot of like, I've now been at a few startups in a row, and I think this is where I just decided like, what, this is not for me. And I like the last role I was at, Series B, I joined as their head of data. I was not their first head of data. And that to me is like, I'm not saying it's a flag, but it's something that I should have thought about a little bit more. And you go in and there's only like, you're hired because you come from Uber, you got this marketplace background, but like at the end of the day, can't really affect that much change if you're not going to be able to actually drive and implement. And that's honestly where I decided, and I mean I kind of was feeling it, but now I'm like confirmed, like I don't really want to even label myself as a data scientist. And I'll get to a little bit more of that too, just in how it played out in consulting, but that's where I felt it. And a good example for me is like I look at like Elena Verna, who started her career as an analyst, and then her career took off when she became a growth leader. And she's a growth leader who has an analytics superpower. And that's the kind of the same thing. Or like, if you look at most of the time, I mean, there's probably edge cases, but most leaders at these levels are not, I think DoorDash is the only one I really know that at consumer tech that has a chief analytics officer. But like otherwise, like oftentimes they're positioned under someone else, right? Like you have to have a very special culture and set of things go really right for a data leader to truly be effective and listened to and not just like pushed and dismissed. In terms of my own consulting experience, so I think a lot of this is on me in terms of I wasn't positioning myself right, but like you could be a marketing leader for like 2 years and now you're all of a sudden you can leave and be like, I'm a fractional CMO. I was a data leader for 10 years and nobody wanted a fractional data leader. And right, the thing that I was facing was either you're too early stage and no early stage startup really wants that, or you go to like this mid stage, say like Series B, Series C, and it's like, we'll just hire one full time. We don't need a fractional. And I was like, this is fresh. Like you don't understand how complex it is to, if you haven't led a data leader before, to just bring on someone new. And I think that's where also for my own like potential and my own like, opportunities, like I was just like calling myself a data leader is not really getting me where I want. Ironically enough, as I've sort of written more about just marketing and marketing science, I'm getting more interest in inbound and people being like, hey, help us with measurement strategy. And I'm like, great, this I can work with, right? Like, again, like I can speak your language as a marketer and I happen to be really strong at data science. But again, they're associating and connecting with me because I can speak to them as a marketer first. And that to me is why I've, made that subtle shift in my mind. And the last thing is, I just think marketing stories are so much more interesting. Like, honestly, like I cannot read posts. I don't read academic papers. Like none of it is fascinating to me because one, there's always gonna be someone better than me at it. And so I'll just go to them and say, hey, can you explain this to me? But two, like, I don't think that's like, when I think of like diminishing returns, sometimes I think of like that's where data science comes. Like the first 80% of impact you can do without data science. And then data science is really good at that last sort of 80 to 99%. And I like the first 0 to 80%, right? I like the sort of wild, wild west. I like the chaos. I like the like imperfection. And so for me, just even like feeling where I get energy from, it's not from reading data science stuff. Like, posts that talk about Bayesian versus frequentist approaches. I'm just like, I spent 8 years of my career not knowing there was a difference. So like, it's not like you need it to be a great data scientist, right? A lot of it comes down to just my own experiences. I think that's probably it.
Ironically, a lot of what you're describing is sort of a positioning problem in your career path and job title and how you position yourself to the market. It is a marketing problem. I guess here's an odd question. Do you think there are traits or skills of data scientists, thinking about the folks that you've worked with, that make them particularly valuable potential additions to marketing teams as marketers? Or do you think this is a pretty odd outlier career path that you found yourself on?
Well, I'll start what I think are really good data scientists, and then maybe see if they fit into marketing.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to two real key things. Curiosity and communication. And when I say curiosity, like, I remember at Uber and some of the other marketing scientists that I really enjoyed, like, they were just relentless about trying to understand the business, and they were curious about why people were doing things this way, who was working on it, like how did it all fit in. Like, it wasn't like, this is my job or this is not my job, right? I think when I hear this is not my job, it's already like a red flag to me, because the people that like they were just so obsessed and again, curious. And then they had this amazing ability to communicate, and it wasn't always communicating results. Like, that is of course a very important one, but it's communicating everything beforehand. It's communicating, hey, how do we go about doing this? Hey, here's my thoughts on this. And learning how to manipulate is the best word, because it's how it's like what you're actually doing, effectively doing, but like manipulating without feeling like it was a manipulation, right? Like, you're like, oh, I don't think that's a great test, or why don't we try this, or like, and it's this ability to communicate and like resonate on a human level. And it made those two things are by far it. In fact, like, the best people I've worked with, we knew SQL and we would use Google Sheets, and that was effectively it. Like, maybe R, maybe Python, but like, there was nothing more. It was just about like, being super curious and just being really good at communicating. And so when you apply that to like, can a marketing team use that? And the answer is, of course, because curiosity also often came around through the lens of like a customer. So it's like, why did the customer do that? Like, why is the data showing this? And that natural curiosity leads to people that are then thinking about qualitative research and like, let me just go talk to the customer, or let me go talk to another team. Maybe they've got an answer, right? And that curiosity, I think, spins up just a more effective marketer and marketing scientist. So yeah, I think those are. So to answer your question, yes, I think there's traits about a data scientist that if you were to bring onto a marketing team would absolutely be useful.
Yeah. Food for thought, perhaps, if there are folks that are resonating with your description of the differences. For the marketing folks who are listening, which there certainly are, why should they go out and subscribe to Experimental? What are some of the things they can learn in your upcoming content?
So I think first off, there's a lot of misconceptions about just even things like metrics. So one of the articles that I really enjoyed writing was like, how do you properly calculate monthly active users? All right, and just as like a tagline, like, monthly active users is not one metric; it's actually 4. Right? It's new users plus existing users, resurrected users, reactivated users, and churn users, depending on how you want to calculate it. But anyway, there's 4 or 5 components to it. And I think for me, like, that's it. It's really just simplifying what feel like complex thoughts and discussions into like, hey, it's actually quite accessible. And again, the goal is like, just become a slightly smarter marketer, right? If my content can help you talk to your finance team better, talk to data scientists better, talk to your product team better, and talk to your own team better, that's that's what I want. Because at the end of the day, like marketing is already tough. We already know a lot of the stats around how long CMOs last in roles and things like that. Like, I want to equip marketers and marketing scientists with like, hey, how do you succeed more at your job than the average person? So I think that's my mission, and a lot of my content is around that. And that's, if I can have someone just say, yay, like, I thought about this concept when I was working on this project because of your work, then great.
Yeah, I'll give a big +1 to that as someone who's been a marketer his entire career. A lot of people get into marketing and have early success because they have some degree of taste, perhaps, and the ceiling that they find on their career progression in that sort of mid-stage is if they fail to build some of that quantitative, financial, business, data literacy beyond just the marketing function itself to, communicate the impact and importance of what they're working on. So highly recommend that folks read your work, start to think about this in their work, and apply it. Maybe take some lessons from how Uber did things at a smaller scale, perhaps.
Yeah, and just the last note on that is a lot of stuff Uber did, you can apply at smaller scales, and I think that's my job too, is to sort of say like, hey, you don't need billion-dollar budgets and world-class data scientists. You can actually do this right now.
Underappreciated, I think, across many. I have this conversation with folks on experimentation all the time. Like, yes, you can experiment in the way that Netflix and Microsoft are doing it. It is not, some rarefied air per se. Cool. Well, thanks so much for talking us through it.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much to Sundar for the conversation and for sharing so much of his insights along the journey. I still love that thing about, a marketer who happens to be good at data science. Make sure to check out his newsletter and podcast, Experimental, which you can find in the show notes or at experimental.beehive.com. I'm Ryan Lucht, and for all of us at Datadog and Outperform, until next time, keep experimenting.